COVID-19 and internet traffic in Brazil. I'd like to start this panel by thanking University of São Paulo and Planetary Health Alliance for the organization of this global conference, digitally co-hosted by University of São Paulo, Brazil. It's the first time that this global conference comes to the Global South. It's a reason of joy for us, and I have the honor and the pleasure to have two renowned speakers who deeply understand the topic of internet in Brazil from the point of view of the quality of infrastructure, traffic, and I can say that internet has become an essential tool to deal with social distancing and also to mitigate the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. The data that we have from the survey of our independent management board in Brazil shows that before the pandemic, we had 127 million users of internet in Brazil, representing approximately 74% of the global population, considering the rural areas and all regions in Brazil. And when the social distancing measures exactly to contain the dissemination of the novel coronavirus were adopted, our network infrastructure for the exchange of traffic called IX.br, one of the largest network exchange network in the world, operated with a peak of 13.5 terabits per second. IXPR is an infrastructure operated by the Nucleus of Information Coordination, NIC.br. And today we're still living the pandemic, but after this first wave where the internet became an essential element, a window to the world, we are operating with a traffic that surpasses 18 terabits per second. This shows that internet traffic has reached an unprecedented volume in the country. And that's exactly the topic of our panel. We are going to discuss how the internet infrastructure in Brazil was able to face this growth in traffic, keeping quality at the same time, the quality of access. So I'd like to invite our first speaker, who is Julio Sirota, the IXPR infrastructure manager, who will tell us about the impact of the pandemic on internet traffic. An example is the fact that this conference is being held with thousands of people from all over the world accessing our infrastructure here in Brazil. And this shows that we are all of us, we are having our everyday work in the internet and also personal appointments. So thank you, Alexandre. Let me share my screen. And internet has become an essential tool in our lives today. Just like electricity, gas, energy is something that it's very difficult to go without. Initially, I'm going to show you in a very simplified fashion. I'm going to try to show how internet works, how it is formed. So the internet is a network of networks. These are thousands of networks and dozens of thousands of networks interconnected to each other. And there's a hierarchic structure among them. And this is related to the role played by each one of these networks. These networks that form the internet, they are called, technically speaking, they are called autonomous systems, ASs. In Brazil, they also use the English acronym AS. So what is the role played by these networks? They can become content providers. They can become content distribution network, CDNs. They can be internet service providers, ISPs, purely interconnection networks that interconnect other networks, and so on and so forth. So when you access the internet, your requests, they have a certain destination. A remote service, for example, you wish to access Facebook, for example. So the request will come from your computer, will go through a number of networks until it reaches the computer that has the Facebook network to respond to your request. Within this infrastructure that looks like a donut, there is an element that is called IXP. This is the acronym for Internet Exchange Point, which is what we operate in INC.br. This is a network structure that is meant to interconnect networks that are close to each other. This is to facilitate this exchange of messages among the networks. This initiative to operate traffic points, it's called IXBR. Initially, the name was PTT Metro, started in 2004, and today we have 33 internet exchange points operating in Brazil. And an important information, these points are not interconnected. The focus is really to exchange traffic in metropolitan regions. From the operational point of view, NIC.br, it's a civil organization. It's a non-for-profit organization. The IXPR today is funded by resources that come from the .br domain's annual fees. So these fees then are collected by INC, and the remaining funds after NIC pays for their operations is invested in this internet exchange points in Brazil. Currently, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and in the middle of the year, Fortaleza participants are charged for the operational costs. So we follow this rule. And we don't charge from other places until they reach a traffic of 1 terabit per second in peak time. Today, São Paulo IXPR has the most number of participants, more than 2,200, and more traffic, above 13 terabits per second in the world. Within IXPR network, we can reach 82% of Brazilian networks, Brazilian ASs. This is different from saying that it reaches 82% of Brazilian internet users. And why is that? Because not all networks that participate in Internet Brazil are connected to IXPR, meaning that today, for example, we have major operators, carriers that do not participate in IXPR, but they have very important participation. The essential role played by IXPR is to provide capillarity together with small and mid-sized internet providers. This is a very active market in the Brazilian internet development today. And then the question is, with the beginning of the pandemic and the quarantine, what happened to internet traffic in Brazil? This is not an easy answer because it involves different actors. We have the major carriers, we have content providers, we have many different stakeholders, and all of these companies are connected to IXPR. Each one has their own routing traffic and traffic routing. They choose the best way in which they will operate. The IXPR is simply a minor participant within all of this structure. If we consider a traffic exchange point, especially São Paulo, it serves as a bridge between internet access providers and content providers. So for example, in São Paulo, we have several data centers where we have global content providers. So these providers can come from different parts in Brazil. They reach São Paulo, and through one single connection in this network, we have access to all of these contents. IXPR does not take the internet to final users. Those who do it are access providers. IXPR, that is funded by NIC.br and ICBR, is a facilitator. It improves the quality of internet access. Let's speak more specifically about the effect of the pandemic and the quarantine. So we can see on the left, in March 2020, we have a growth of 32% almost immediately in a matter of 2 weeks virtually, where the quarantine process started, people remained home, worked from home. So this had like an immediate impact. After, we can see that there was a drop and a more of a stabilization trend. And this drop was mostly motivated by the fact that the main video streaming providers, such as Netflix and Facebook, YouTube, decrease the bits per second rate necessary for people to watch videos, be it through the fact that they wanted to work with a lower standard resolution, such as high definition the resolution, and this led to a decrease, initial decrease in the bits rate. This was not exactly important to IXBR because we had a capability, but thinking on the end, so that the users of internet could be benefited, that networks were much more stressed than our infrastructure, in fact. So the rest of the curve is shown here until April. It's interesting to see the growth and what happened. Another thing that we realized in this first moment was a change in the traffic profile. This first image that we see, it looks like Sunday for us. Why do we say that? We are used to. We see this, we are constantly seeing these curves and we know, oh, this looks like a certain day of the week. And why is it? Because it depends on the volume of traffic, this difference of how much was used in the afternoon in comparison to the evening and so on and so forth. So why does it look like a Sunday? Because people are at home during the day, they are watching more, using more the internet. So what we saw that in most of the weekdays, we have a correlation between this plateau, the stability in the afternoon that decreases from 25% to 15%, indicating that the use of internet during the day has increased. Exactly due to the fact that people are at home. And if we consider the traffic volume, which is the area below the curve, you see that there was an increase at the level of 23%. These are three curves showing the traffic in 3 different days. In blue was March the 2nd, before the start of the pandemic in Brazil. And then we see the brown curve on the 14th. And March 24, the orange curve. In the afternoon, you see that there is a significant increase. And also in terms of the global use. So these were the movements that we saw in the first 3 weeks. So we wanted to show you a very interesting fact. It's a way that we have to evaluate until when the impact of the pandemic could be felt in the internet from our point of view. This curve shows the peak volumes, the maximum traffic per day between April and May of 2020. As we can see, there was little variation. And for us, this is not normal because, as I said, each day of the week has a determined behavior. So if we look at the same information in October and November, you can see that for each day of the week, there is a different peak volume. For example, here it's common in Brazil on Mondays and Tuesdays. We have more internet use. On Wednesdays, where you have soccer, this traffic decreases. Saturday is also a day that you don't have such high traffic. Sunday is a day that we have a lot of use. So what we realized was that after June and beginning of July of 2020, we could not see anymore an influence of the quarantine period, so that we could say, well, the internet is being affected by the quarantine. For us, from our point of view, we had already gone back to the normal standards. And to close, I want to show you that from the beginning of the pandemic, we received in IXPR, we realized that there was an increase in the request for new connections. And this can be evaluated as follows. Well, initially, the access providers started looking for more connectivity options to improve the quality of service, to have more robust and redundant services offered by them. 2 minutes. And here, I can also show you the capacity that we have provisioned for São Paulo IXPR participants. So we see that from April 2020 on, we have a continuous growth. That is reflected in this initial curve that I showed you. So we see that we continue to see a growth in the use of internet. We believe that this is no longer due to the pandemic, but simply to the development of the internet market in Brazil, with access providers, more content providers. So it's very good for us to see how much internet is growing and that this is becoming more important in our country context. We know that after the end of the pandemic, in the new normal, we will continue to have most of the digital activities that we acquired, we will continue to have them. So that's what I had to bring to you, and I'm open to questions. Thank you, Julio, for this such accurate overview on the internet traffic during COVID in Brazil and how the Brazilian infrastructure is supporting this traffic. Now we are going to go to another very important point, that it's not only how to support this traffic, but also to support it with quality. So another initiative promoted by NIC.br, also using this funds, as Julio said, all the projects are funded by the domain name registration fees. We are going to see a project that is equally important, the measurement of internet traffic quality in Brazil. For that, I want to invite Gabriela Marin. She's a data scientist and with Ceptec within NIC.br, who has been working in a very dedicated fashion in this project of measuring internet quality in Brazil. So, Gabriela, you have the floor for 15 minutes.
Initially, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to participate in this panel. It's very nice to be able to introduce our measurements. As Alexandre said, I'm going to talk about the internet quality during the year of 2020. And just to clarify matters, the presentation will cover what the data tells us. I'm going to talk about quality metrics, what kind of data we used for the analysis, the graphs, and then I will address the measurement team initiatives in order to contribute to settle the COVID pandemic. Let me talk about data. I'm going to be talking about what we consider to be quality metrics. When we think about quality, we think, well, internet is slow or internet's fast, because we all know the download speed. I'm always going to set an analogy with the traffic of cars to explain the other metrics that are not that intuitive. So when we think about download, it's information per second. That's a speed. Using the analogy, a car is a bit of information. A car is a bit of information. So download is how fast the car will get to us. So when you're trying to download the information from the internet and how fast it gets to the computer. But we also have the upload speed when you want to submit information into the network. So then you measure how fast the car will get to its destination. So how fast the information will get to a certain destination, an email message that you want to send, for example. And then there is another measure. So this is just time, that is latency. We use latency to inform how long the information takes to go back and forth. So in this case, how long it takes to do the round trip, to get to its destination and then come back to us. That's latency. The higher the time, the lower the quality. That's opposite of speed, right? Latency is opposite of speed. The other matrix is jittering. Jitter is the assessment of latency. In our analogy, it means that if we address the many bits of information, it shows what's the time for the round trip, get to the destination and come back. So it varies according to the packages of information. Looking into different cars, so how big is the difference? And jitter is used to check the stability of the connection. If the variation is high, if jitter is high, the connection is unstable. You cannot foresee how much time it will take for the information to go back and forth, a round trip. The final metric is the loss of packages. That is the percentage of the information that we submitted that didn't get to the final destination. So our analogy would be how many cars we're going to lose in the way, along the way, either because of an accident or because the car had an issue. So these are the metrics that we use to consider or to measure the internet quality level. And the data that I'm going to introduce to you, we have a family of meters. Differently from Julio, he talked about the providers, but here the measure quality according to the CMAT equipment have to do with the user quality. So they will download our app, they go into our website, they do measurements, or they install the CMAT box that will collect data every 4 hours. So we used all of these methods to measure the internet quality, and we used data of 2020 from February to December 2020. So we devised the geolocated subset. Well, because we knew where they were. We were interested in analyzing the internet quality in Brazil, for example, according to the geolocation subset. What does data tell us? The y-axis is speed in this chart. The x-axis is days throughout the year of 2020. And green is the download speed and orange is the upload speed. Additionally, we have some vertical lines showing the first case of COVID, the first death in Brazil, and reduction in the quality of the streamings, as Julio was mentioning. So what do we see? In terms of the quality level of the internet, there was a small decrease in the download quality after the first case of COVID was worsened after the first death. But the streaming companies made an effort to work with quality. So we went to the levels before the pandemic. If you look at the green dots, we can see the pattern. But it's important to highlight that the reduction that we observed is quite small. The streaming efforts were important, and the reduction in quality was not drastic. It was not a true worsened scenario. So this pattern was seen in the upload speed. A short worsening here, but it's not important. After the reduction of quality, we had actually a research of quality levels throughout 2020. The download and upload speeds improved over the year. This has to do with what Julio said as well. So the pandemic caused changes, and there was this general investment that was made to enhance services. What if we take into account latency and jitter? It has to be measured by time, and jitter is a variation of latency that is measured in time. It's similar to the speed. In this case, increasing is bad. So there was a slight increase that was caused after the first death by COVID. So home office began after this most prevalently. But the reduction of quality softens out, and then we resume the levels which are deemed to be normal, and it ends the year better than when it started. Jitter had the opposite response. That's the orange curve that you can see here. So if it was to get worse, it would increase in value. And right after the first case, jitter went down. The first death caused a minimum increase, but not significant. So jitter had no impact whatsoever because of the pandemic. And finally, the package loss. Just like jitter, it didn't have any effect because of the pandemic. In pre-pandemic periods, we had worse values. And as we advanced throughout the year, package loss only got better. So what are the lessons learned from all of this? If we look into Brazil, we noticed that we didn't need that much of an effort to keep up the internet quality in Brazil. The streaming companies, they could ensure good services. It was not interruption of services. We had a slight reduction only on the service level. So we had no losses in terms of internet quality. But let us address the regions because Brazil is quite heterogeneous, right? And the regions are at different development stages in terms of the internet network. So I broke down by region. And this chart is a bit different. I didn't want to compare the regions. I wanted to compare the region within itself. So I normalized February accounts for pre-pandemic periods. And in the other months, we have the amounts of the region divided by the pre-pandemic values. So we compare the region before and after the pandemic. Did it get better or worse? And the percentage. On the left, we have the chart according to the download speed and latency about the efforts of our team to try and help during the pandemic. First, as soon as home office began with a social isolation, we provided a detailed report where we analyzed the provider, the quality of the providers. We compare, the countryside and the capital cities, state by state as well. And then we published weekly reports on the quality of internet services up until December. And the publications are available to you on this link here that you can see. In addition to that, we inaugurated this project together with RNP and SUS, which is the Brazilian Public Health System, to start measuring the quality of internet services in the primary care units in Brazil. This was done in May because of the pandemic. And we began collecting data from the health primary care units in August. So they go into the websites, they type in their code, and they measure the quality level, and we collect data. We do have measurements from 751 primary care units, UBSs, and the UBSs are disseminated all around Brazil in the 5 different regions. But we still have a long way to go because Brazil has more than 44,000 primary care units, primary healthcare units, the UBSs. So we have a huge potential to expand this project. We are quite enthused with this project. It can bring about many benefits, not only to mitigate the pandemic effects, but we can deal with other issues of the health system. For example, we know that the flow of patients depends on the presence or the social isolation. An ambulance has to go to the care unit, but the care unit will say, we're full, take the patient to the next stage of the flow of patients. We know there are many states and municipalities that want to change this scenario. They want to deny, the acceptance of the patient by email. The ambulance shouldn't go to the healthcare unit. The ambulance can send an email asking if there is a place for that person, for that patient. The unit will say no, and then they go into the the next stage of the flow straight on. That would save money, energy, time. Of course, that would save many lives as well, because the patient should not be riding inside the ambulance. There should be an electronic denial for that patient. We can only coordinate the email system if the internet connection quality at the primary healthcare units is good. So this project could, categorize the primary care units in terms of services, internet services, to know whether we can implement such electronic system or not, because depending on the internet access quality, we cannot implement the system, right? So we do believe that this project, although it has emerged because of the pandemic, but it is going to bring about many other benefits. That's all. That's what I had to tell you. Once again, thank you so much for your attention, and that's my email information. You may get in touch. Thank you, Gabriela. It's quite interesting to see that the quality of the connection to the internet is not limited to the download and upload speeds. There are other parameters that are highly relevant, especially in the medical field, because latency can make many applications unfeasible. It's important to see that even with the increased traffic, as was well explained by Julio, the quality of the internet connection in Brazil remained good. So I would like to explore now some of the points that are related to the first part with Julio. Many things might have happened in the backstage, right, Julio? In telecommunications overall speaking, but in terms of providers, access providers, before the pandemic and after the pandemic. So Julio, could you share with us? How about the stakeholders in the ecosystem? How did they handle this event of the pandemic? One of the first measures that took place, and it was precisely the telecommunication services, the internet services, they were listed as essential services. There was this decree that was passed by the government listing the essential services, and internet was included. So this enabled us to act. The telecom companies, and even us, we, had means to have access to data centers. We were able to do the required operations to keep up the internet infrastructure running well. Something else that happened, we did have some meetings involving all of the sectors, all of the stakeholders. Anatel, the telecommunications agency, the Ministry of Communications, the content providers, the access providers. We do have many important associations today of providers, so that we could sit together and discuss. Okay, we need to keep the internet running and running well. So what do we need to do? What are the actions that we are going to take? This was very much important. This was very much important for us to organize our actions. Something else that I believe to be important, I think we should highlight this. And it's my conclusion, because my presentation and Gabriela's presentation, we didn't talk before, but we can see that the information is convergent. That is the role of the access providers, the role of the operators. That was very much important. They really worked hard to keep up the capacity. We had to rush. We had to make expansions. We ourselves within IXPR, we had to expand our capacity for many services for the content providers, for example. So there has been strong, hefty investments. In spite of all of the difficulties, in spite of the hurdles of the scenario. For example, we faced difficulties during 2020 to acquire telecommunication equipment. The global market is really busy, so it's quite difficult to buy. We have long terms of delivery for buying equipment. So even so, quality level was kept up, and quality was just further enhanced. So this results from many people's work. It's quite interesting, because we users on the other side, we in the audience, we don't know what's happening in the backstage. so that we can, truly have millions or thousands of people watching many parallel panels as we are having right now with a high quality level. So thank you so much for telling us about these elements. So we are not in the backstage, we're not familiar with such elements. I have a question to Gabriela now. I know that the measurement systems that measure quality, they have been used in many schools of the public network. There are virtually 30,000 school units. And you were speaking about the primary care units in the health sector. We have 1,000 UBSs, as we call them, the primary healthcare units. So, Gabriela, I have a question. With the work that you've done, it's been a few months, right? So can you tell us anything about the quality of the internet in the UBS? Is saying it is as important as the Brazilian schools. So can you talk about that? Yeah. Well, there is a difference when we think about the regions. There is a smaller difference than that of the other measurements. What I mean is, the difference that we see between the regions is smaller if we take into account the measurement of the UBSs, which are the primary healthcare units, which is nice. But North and Northeastern have smaller rates, but they have enough quality levels to maintain, actions within a hospital, for example. In the Northeastern region, we have a download of 59 megabytes per second. In the Northern region, 36 megabits per second. Well, it's not that far. Considering the other metrics, these two regions, well, they have latency that is a bit higher than that of the other regions, but anyhow, speaking of values, North region latency is 66.9 milliseconds and Northeastern 40 milliseconds. A bit above than the southern regions, but it's not a latency that could impair the provision of services in a hospital, for example, or to a unit, a healthcare unit. So based on the data that we have collected, quality level would suffice to provide required services in a primary care unit that we call UBS. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Gabriela. We are sharply on time. That's the end of our session. So I would like to deeply thank your generosity. Thank you, Julio Sirota and Gabriela Marin. Thank you for your generosity and your competence. The competence that you have used to address the internet infrastructure in Brazil. Well, both in terms of traffic and quality level, these are examples that Brazil, through Link.br, can take to so many other countries. And how to handle efficiently such infrastructure. It is a very critical infrastructure, not only for the citizens, but also for the enterprises, the governments, the civil society organizations, the academia, and so on and so forth. Today, we rely 100% on this infrastructure, this internet infrastructure. With that, I would like to thank the two panelists, and I remind you that tomorrow at 10 a.m. we are going to have a panel that is going to address the importance of digital inclusion as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I would like to invite you all at 10 a.m. It is a side event in this great conference, but please connect to discuss the importance of data for public policies. Once again, I thank the University of São Paulo and the Planetary Health Alliance to bring this for bringing this conference to Brazil. Up until Friday, we are going to have several panels, and at 11 a.m. we have the main auditorium with the conference. Keep connected until Friday. My big hug, and I wish you all an excellent day. Thank you very much.